All right, we are live on another edition of the Edlow Podcast. Subscribe, subscribe, subscribe. As I always say, this room smells like ramen. My daughter was in here and she's got a big box of candy here, and she apparently was eating some late night ramen as a snack. So that's fun. That's a good way to start. So, why am I doing another Just Me podcast? I just did one. I do one a month, but am I doing a just me today? And you're probably wondering why. And I've only a couple of times done a second just me in the middle of a month. And the reason I did it this month was because I actually got multiple messages and emails letting me know that apparently there has been some developments in this wrestling case with Vince McMahon. And for those of you who've been following, I did a just me when the the complaint and request for a jury trial came out from the plaintiff Janel Grant, just kind of breaking down what exactly the 68-page complaint said. And and again, I'll just say for people who don't know, a 68-page complaint, especially with the level of detail that Janelle Grant's attorneys used, is exceptionally rare, especially when it included screenshots of text messages and all of the details of their salacious relationship and all the claims. And so, anyway, I got multiple messages from friends of mine who are in and out of the wrestling business telling me that apparently there had been some developments. The big development being that Vince McMahon um, had his attorneys file a motion to compel arbitration. What does that mean? So essentially, what that means is they are claiming that there should have never been a complaint filed in the court because Miss Grant agreed to an arbitration clause. And what is an arbitration clause? So essentially, an arbitration clause is an agreement to have a neutral third party hear the agreement out of court. Usually, it is a former attorney or judge or someone who is an authority in the arena of the subject matter uh, um, that you're dealing with. So, in my practice, I often deal with arbitration because in every single insurance contract that you sign with your car insurance, there is an arbitration clause for underinsured motorist coverage, which means that if you're going to bring a claim, you get hit by a car and the person who's driving doesn't have insurance or doesn't have enough insurance, and you have underinsured motorist coverage in your insurance, then you can bring a claim against your own insurance, but you would be going to arbitration. Arbitration is often, I hate arbitration, frankly, except for rare exceptions. I don't think it's fair for the consumer. And the reason for that is because typically many of these arguments that you have or many of these claims you have, the arbitrator, often the people who are picking the arbitrators are the people, the defendants, the car insurance companies, the hotels, the gyms, the different and they're using the same ones over and over and over. So naturally, even though they don't want to admit it, the arbitrators are a little bit biased simply because, well, they want to do a good job for the company that's continually coming back and paying them, right? At least that's the argument. I don't know much about arbitration in the context of this, which I would categorize as an employment action. Um, but but regardless, I mean, there's a human trafficking element to it, but ultimately saying that there was some quid pro quo going on. But regardless, the interesting thing about this, first of all, I want to say there's a few things that I found really interesting about this. And that is when I got the messages, hey, this had dropped, I had an incredibly hard time finding the actual text of the motion to compel arbitration. there were not a lot of articles. Like as soon as the complaint was filed against Vince McMahon, you could find the text anywhere, the claims anywhere. That it was not the case for this motion to compel arbitration. And you may be saying, well, a motion to compel arbitration is not that big a deal. In this context, it is, because there is a pretty significant preliminary statement that Vince McMahon's attorneys put in this motion to compel arbitration that refutes some of the claims made in the request for a jury trial. And the interesting thing is actually, since I got the messages, Janel Grant's attorneys have filed a motion to strike, which means completely get it stricken from the record of the court, the preliminary statement saying that it's salacious and victim blaming and that it wasn't appropriate for a motion to compel arbitration, which I find really interesting. And this is simply the attorney in me talking now. I'm not making a judgment one way or the other. The level, but I would say that it's very interesting that the plaintiff's attorney in this case put an exceptional level of detail, almost an unnecessary level of detail in the complaint, but then has a problem with a preliminary statement that refutes some of the claims made in the complaint that didn't necessarily need to be there to get the complaint heard and accepted. Regardless of all of that, I would tell you, I've read this document. Most of it is just legal stuff about motions to compel about arbitration clauses and the requirements of that. But there is some pretty interesting stuff in here, and I would tell you, as someone who is an officer of the court and has gone to trial on cases and has actually prosecuted cases in front of courts and arbitrators, hearing this stuff is the reason why there's a jury instruction telling jurors you do not make any judgments until you've heard both sides, because the plaintiff always goes first, so you're always hearing their end of the case. So there are some claims here that I think go directly to the idea that she was a human trafficking victim, or that she was essentially engaged in a non-consensual relationship. I have a lot of thoughts on this after reading this that I want to address. But I want to, I also think that as somebody who's now engaged in being a podcaster, and also as someone who is an attorney who has kind of reported um, on this in a kind of a legal fashion, sort of. I felt a need to report this because I don't think it's being reported very well. I didn't even hear about it or know about it until it was brought to my attention. So I'm bringing it to your attention. And some people may think, oh, well, why are you doing this? She's a victim and he's this big bad perpetrator. And that may be true. And in fact, I have a lot of feelings that go right with that. However, like I said, as someone who is kind of, I guess, engaging in some sort of weird podcast reporter situation and have been covering this on my podcast, I just felt the need to address it and give my thoughts. So let's talk about some of the claims. I'm not going to go directly into all of it, but here are some of the claims that I think were interesting. And let's back up a little bit and kind of explain. Let me back up a little bit and kind of explain just for context, in case you didn't listen to the other podcast. I think that was probably just me number 9 or something like that. um, so if you want to go back and listen to that and hear my thoughts on that, because I was pretty shook up by what I heard, as many people were who are wrestling fans. But let me just tell you some of the things that were claimed in the initial, I guess you'd call it, request for jury trial and complaint. So the picture of who Janel Grant was that was painted in the complaint was that of a young woman who had been struggling financially because for years she had been providing round the clock care for uh, her two parents who were aging and passing away, and that she was in the process of foreclosing on their home, and that she had been dealing with profound grief. And then at the time, someone put in a good word with Vince McMahon, who then met her and had her coming to his apartment all the time to talk about where might be a good fit for her, and that he was placing her somewhere in the legal department, even though she was not qualified. At least that was what was being suggested. And then, of course, there were all of these salacious claims about the things that he would ask her to do, and screenshots of text messages that suggested those things. Um, and then on top of that, also at the end, he coerced her into signing an NDA, said he'd pay her $3 million in installments, and then just abruptly stopped paying after $1 million, which brought her to bringing this complaint and this claim. So that's the picture that is being painted. And then on top of that, also, all of these claims that she would be, she was having PTSD in all of these situations, and she was being so messed up. She was, kind of isolated from all her friends and all these things, which may or may not be true. Um, in all of these things, I want to just address both in this motion to compel arbitration and in the complaint and in any court document, you can say anything you want. Now, sometimes you have to sign a declaration attesting that things that you say are true. But mind you, like, you can say anything. So all of this should really be taken with a grain of salt. And really, when the rubber is gonna hit the road is at a trial, when people are put under oath and being questioned in a court of law. So, but with that context, um, let's talk about some of the things that this preliminary statement specifically, but then also what the motion itself has said. So again, the complaint paints her as a young woman. I thought someone in her 20s. Apparently, no, she was 42 years old. She had not been living with her parents, as had been said in the past. Her and Vince McMahon met in 2019. Her father had passed away in 2017. Her mother had passed away years before that, and that her dad had been living in a senior care home for some time prior to his passing. So she had not been providing round the clock care, at least according to this, um, at the time that she had been meeting or had first met Vince McMahon. Also, that home that had been foreclosed on had actually been foreclosed on again 2 years beforehand, and in a signed declaration stated that she wanted nothing to do with the foreclosure action or dealing with the home at all. Um, Additionally, according to Vince McMahon, she, on her resume and in speaking with him, told him that she had actually graduated from law school for Pace University, but had never passed the bar. She had also was not living in a foreclosed home, but was actually living in that luxury apartment complex with her long-term fiance, who was a vice president or an officer for a local television um, company, and who'd also worked for MasterCard and various things. Who she was living with him at the time, and that she would often leave their apartment, go 4 floors up to Vince McMahon's place in order to pursue their affair. So the allegation from Vince McMahon is that both of them understood that the other one was in a long-term committed relationship and that they were engaged in an affair. So, so certainly painting a different picture than what was painted in the complaint. He also mentions in there that there was an email sent. Their relationship had ended in late 2021, early 2022. On Christmas Eve in 2021, she sent an email to Vince McMahon calling him her best friend, her love, and her everything. So this was right before, if true, this was right before the relationship ended. Certainly does not necessarily depict the same type of situation that is painted in the complaint. The other thing that I find very interesting, and this is the legal mind, is something that I find even more interesting, is that she, in email correspondence with Vince McMahon felt like the number of what should be the consideration paid in exchange for the non-disclosure agreement should have been somewhere in $1 million to $1.5 million, and that she had referenced that she thought it should be more because she was not able to serve as a director in the legal department. Remember, she told them that she had a law degree in the legal department for a year and never reached her full potential as a senior vice president, which was promised to her. And so, because of that, now, mind you, none of that was because of stress or anxiety or PTSD or any of those things. It was for lost opportunities within the WWE. So they signed the NDA. She actually was represented by an attorney. According, again, this is all according to Vince McMahon. Some of this, none of this could be true. This could all be false. But then on top of that, she was represented by an attorney. She agreed to the non-disclosure agreement. She agreed to confidentiality, and that her attorney actually argued for the arbitration clause and actually argued some of the terms of the arbitration clause. And then she signed a release of all claims. Now, what does that mean? So that means that in exchange for this money, she signed what's called a release, saying that she would not bring any action at all for anything against Vince McMahon. I mean, depending on the release, that's essentially what a release of all claims would look like. So I deal with releases all the time. And every time that someone pays out on a case, they want a release saying that this payment is going to be full and final payment for the claim, and that they'll release them for all other claims known now or otherwise would come out of the car accident or the slip and fall event or the wrongful death that I'm bringing. So a release of all claims is finality for this issue. So according to Vince McMahon's response, Janel Grant understood, and almost all arbitration agreements have some sort of language in it that says the person who signs this has read and understands all the terms. They've been instructed by their attorney or their legal representative of what it means, and they're fully signing this of their own free will, which she signed. So they're saying essentially that that she gave up her right to bring a claim for a jury trial. And so, and then also on top of that, she also agreed that she would keep it confidential. As far as the money that was supposed to be paid, it was $1 million up front, and then $500,000 every year for the next 4 years to reach $3 million. The reason that he stopped paying, according to Vince McMahon's complaint, was because she had leaked her information to the press in violation of the agreement, which is why he stopped paying. So it wasn't a situation of, well, he just stopped paying because he's a big jerk, according to him. So definitely painting a different picture of the situation. Um, And essentially what they're saying is that she brought this claim and all of these salacious agreements, which, by the way, they refuted and said all of these things about defecating on her and then forcing her to go into threesomes and doing all these things. They're saying all of that is false. None of it was coerced. It was a completely consensual relationship between two adults. And so um, what they're essentially saying is that she understood and her attorneys should have understood that this should have gone to arbitration, and they only filed the complaint for purposes of publicity and media coverage to harm Vince McMahon, which you can say whatever you want about whether you should have known about this or not. I am of the opinion that I'm glad I've heard that this was going on. I think I wanted the disclosure, but at the same time, if they did this for publicity, there is potential that they could have some sort of repercussions for that. And so, anyhow, so here we have two competing arguments. Now we know what each side is going to say. Essentially, Janel Grant is saying that she was trafficked, that she was engaged in a non-consensual relationship, that she was forced to do things she didn't want to do and coerced under the power of Vince McMahon. And Vince McMahon is saying no, they engaged in a consensual relationship while they both essentially an affair that they both understood that the other one had other partners and were in long-term committed relationships, and that they were just having a very good time together while he apparently was sending her text messages telling her that he told his entire film crew that she would take all of them at the same time. So, here is my view on this. So, what does all of this mean? Let's assume, and I don't believe this is true. Let me first say, I hope this doesn't go to arbitration for a number of reasons. One, I think an arbitration clause um, in this context is incredibly one-sided and definitely something that would have been harmful to Janelle Grant. And on top of that, also, I think this is something in a public forum we should hear about. WWE is one of the most powerful companies in the world, and so I definitely want to hear about this. So I hope it does go to a jury trial because I would love to hear. Because, like I said, who knows what is really true? Who knows what is really true? And the only way we're going to actually hear what is really true, unless there's some sort of quote unquote leaks that you never know if they're true or not, is if it goes to a public jury trial and people are able to report on what witnesses testify to in the situation. But rhetorically, let's assume that Vince McMahon's version of this is true. Let's say that everything he put in there is true and that she was a 42-year-old woman, that she did engage in this consensual relationship, and that she did say all these things and she wasn't really in this grief and all of these things. So what does that mean? Well, I can tell you what it doesn't mean. Like, it doesn't mean that Vince McMahon wasn't using his position of power as a means to coerce women into sexual relationships. That's for sure. I think that this means that he was doing that when she is arguing with him in his this is in his claim. When he is saying, well, she thought that she should get more money because I told her that she could become a vice president while I'm banging her on the side, 4 floors up from where her fiance is living. Like, that certainly does seem to me like there is some sort of what we would call a quid pro quo agreement where she keeps having sex with him and he's going to push her up the ranks at the WWE, giving her more clout, more money, and more experience that she could then use later. She wanted more money because of the loss of opportunity, right? I mean, and again, I think that I'm not saying that I believe Vince McMahon's stuff. In fact, I don't necessarily believe Vince McMahon's side of this. I think this is something that definitely I would love to actually be in the courtroom and see it. But regardless, does this mean that Vince McMahon is any less of a piece of garbage? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. because it is clear that what Vince McMahon is willing to do is to use his position in the WWE as the owner and as a billionaire and as the guy who had the ultimate power in the WWE. It shows that he is willing to use that power for his own sexual gratification and benefit, and that he would give her a job that she necessarily wasn't qualified for, give her a job that he otherwise wouldn't have given her in order to continue that sexual relationship. That's what that means. So, was there a power imbalance? There absolutely was. And there is still a laundry list of allegations, including allegations from John Laurinaitis, who was his right hand man for years, claiming that he was also Vince McMahon's victim in all this. And that is all out there. So, does it really matter whether he, took a dump on her head while he was having sex with her? Does that matter? No, it doesn't. It's still bad. It's still bad. It just means that maybe it wasn't quite as salacious as we thought. And so maybe she did. Maybe she did enter the relationship willingly. But the fact of the matter is that nobody in that position of power should be using that position to try to coerce people and trying to use them for their gratification. And there are lots of stories out there of that very same thing happening over there. Read Ronda Rousey's book. She talks all about it. And so, anyhow, so this is a short one. This is a short one. I wanted to address it, like I said, because we had a few people who wanted to know what I thought about it. I do think, however, before I go in the end, let me just say now. So, what do I think that this means? If she truly did sign that arbitration agreement, this probably isn't going to be going into a jury trial. Um, unless they determine the whole NDA, the whole non-disclosure agreement is null and void because she didn't understand what she was doing or was under duress or some sort of reason like that, it probably wouldn't go to a jury trial and would go to arbitration. And there may be some penalties for her if they did truly do this, knowing that they should not have been able to do that. And I would also say that a release of all claims certainly suggests that she can't come back and sue him again. She signed a release. So these are things that I think are going to play out. And quite frankly, I think it's going to be a very long time before this gets to arbitration or trial because of all of these pretrial allegations that are going to have to be addressed. There's almost certainly going to be a motion for summary judgment on the idea that a release was signed. I mean, I got to think. And all that's got to play out. So this could be going on for years and years and years. And let me say, Vince McMahon is no spring chicken. So lots more to come. We'll see what happens. If somebody wants to, whenever you hear something that's legal that's going on, I don't know if I gave a lot of legalese here, trying to explain this stuff. If you want to find, just so you know, if you want to find the documents, you can. Good luck finding them. It took me forever. I actually had to get away from Google and start using a different search engine called DuckDuckGo, which I just heard on a podcast was one that would get you different results. And I finally found the actual PDF of the motion to compel arbitration. So yeah, and let me also just say it. Sorry, I should have said this at the beginning. A motion to compel arbitration. Essentially, they're filing a motion with the court that the judge has to rule on, saying that they should not proceed in that jurisdiction. They should not proceed to the court. It should be sent to an arbitrator, and the judge will have to hear that. And if the judge decides this should be an arbitration, it goes to arbitration unless Janel Grant's attorneys appeal that result. And if they decide no, we're not going to compel arbitration, then there'll probably be an appeal on Vince McMahon's side. So, like I said, this could go on for years, and so we'll just have to see. It's an interesting deal. In the meantime, enjoy your wrestling. Vince McMahon's not there. I've also heard the rumors before anyone asks. I did hear the rumors that Vince McMahon has a non-compete with TKO that goes until January of 2025, and that he has been talking about potentially uh, starting another wrestling promotion. I don't know what that looks like or who he gets. I don't know what that does. But I got to tell you, I think everyone would universally agree that the WWE as it is right now is so much better than it was under the last, 10 years of Vince McMahon rule. Even just hearing from people I know who work there and things of that nature, hearing from others that how good it is to work for, Paul Levesque and the storytelling and the environment that they live in. I think that that is all a good thing. Um, so would I be supporting a wrestling promotion that Vince McMahon starts? I don't think I would. I don't think I would. And that's hard to say because I do know also that for wrestlers out there, the more companies there are out there, the more jobs there are for people to actually make a living. But I got to tell you, I don't know based on what I've heard and what I've seen, how you necessarily want to live in that place where Vince McMahon is running a wrestling promotion. But if you have thoughts, send them my way. You can comment on YouTube. You can always subscribe, share. We got more stuff coming up. I got a very interesting podcast dropping right after this one with a gospel healer that governments use to foretell natural disasters. And so that'll be a fun one. Um, and we got a whole bunch of other ones coming down the pipe. So if you've listened this far, subscribe, subscribe, subscribe. I really appreciate everybody who follows. Hopefully, this was interesting for you. And we will talk to you again soon. Thanks, guys.